Okay, thank you. Okay, so as I know, this programme has been designed by, it's an event, part of the programme that's been designed by Stirling Council and its partners, and I'd like to thank them for all of their hard work, challenging poverty, not just this week, but throughout the whole year. These are partners that we work with throughout the year and we value them greatly. I'm going to start by thanking Stirling Council staff from our Advice Services and Welfare Reform team, our libraries, youth participation, learning and employability, community development and education. I'd like to thank the Stirling Community Planning Partnership, Fourth Environment Link, Stirlingshire Voluntary Enterprise, Stirling and District Women's Aid and Social Security Scotland. These are partners, but as I say, we work with all year round, and it's always a significant comfort to me when I look at the list and look at the people involved in these agencies and organisations and know that Stirling benefits from their experience and expertise throughout the year. So this week we've been sharing key resources internally with our staff, you may have seen some of them, and with the public on our website and social media. And there's been a whole range of events this week, which Anya has been carefully and lovingly culturing and curating, and some of those have ranged from a drop-in information stalls at Stirling bus station, training sessions, been funding sessions. The full programme can be seen on our Stirling Council website. And I think Anya and I just wanted to kind of ask really that you do look not just at the local resources that are produced this week, but the national resources that have been shared across the week. And probably the easiest way to do that is to search for, this is where I feel like I'm talking a generation out of date, to search for the hashtags challenge poverty and turn the tide. So that's challenge poverty and turn the tide. If you search those, you'll be able to see activity from across the country when you search for that on Twitter. So we're talking at the start of the call there before we started recording about some of the events we've been hearing about. So again, I would really encourage you to look up the things that have been happening and read more about what's been taking place this week. So that's my brief intro to the event done. We're going to have a number of speakers, and I'd first like to welcome Councillor Gerry McGarvey to say some opening remarks.
So very many thanks, Kate, and to yourself as well, Anya. I'm Gerry McGarvey, I'm a councillor, but my professional background is in personal community development, and I've worked in some of the most neglected communities in England, Scotland, Ireland and the US and South Africa over the course of my years on this planet. I'm currently portfolio holder and convener of the newly named Community Wellbeing and Housing Committee, formerly known as Community Planning and Regeneration. The community is responsible for monitoring the effectiveness of all Stirling Council services and those of our partner agencies, primarily engaged in the wellbeing of our citizens. So it's very apt and appropriate that I'm here today, I suppose, and I'm delighted that we're having this online event to share experiences, research and practice to inform how we challenge poverty today, tomorrow, and for as long as is sadly necessary. Tragically, poverty is on the increase. There's no denying the proliferation and increased dependency on food banks, and there's no denying that we are in the midst of a perfect economic storm with the heat or eat dilemma, all neatly wrapped in the rather anodyne, sanitised phrase, cost of living crisis. In my opinion, crisis doesn't hit the mark, and it's been around for the longest time, with many having been struggling for years. Now, I see this not just as a crisis, but an emergency. And with that observation, I'll leave my opinions to the side. Well, almost. The poor are with us always? Really? I don't think it has to be that way. The fundamental purpose of government, UK-wide, Scotland-wide, or local government, is to protect its people. Very often that's seen by national governments in terms of going to war. And indeed, that's maybe what we are trying to do here with regard to challenging poverty, going to war with poverty. But it's primarily with the authority and ability to distribute its resources most equitably. That's what politics should boil down to. And poverty is what happens when we as a society fail in that duty and responsibility or take our eyes off the ball. But I'll leave the detail of that to our presentations today by the Poverty Alliance and John McKendrick, Professor of Social Sciences, Glasgow Caledonian University. As is evident from his academic biography, far from being confined to the hallowed halls of academic research, Dr. John very much sees his work as something to be shared far and wide to influence practice. John wishes others to be able to better understand contemporary poverty in Scotland, particularly child poverty, its underlying causes, and what is to be done. As a result, he is a very popular guest speaker on this subject, willing to share his knowledge and expertise, which is actually just as well, because that's exactly what we want. A better understanding of poverty, its causes, and what must be done to address this collective 21st century societal scandal. Now, without wishing to put words into Professor McKendrick's mouth, it sounds about right when I suggest that until now, academics have only interpreted the world in various ways, and the point is to change it. And my hope today is that as a result of listening to his words and those of the Poverty Alliance, we will become better equipped to do just that, to challenge the prominence of poverty in Stirling and in Scotland.
Thank you, Councillor. Much appreciated. Some lovely references there in those opening remarks. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to introduce now Alison Laird, who joins us today from the Poverty Alliance. Alison's the campaigns manager, and I believe she's going to say a few words. Alison.
Hi there. A tough act to follow there, Councillor McGarvey, but I shall try my best to talk about Challenge Poverty Week. So yes, it's really lovely to be here and to speak with you all about Challenge Poverty Week. I'm the campaigns officer for the Poverty Alliance. I started this role 8 weeks ago, so I'm incredibly new to it and learning very much as I go. So no difficult questions would be appreciated at this point. Maybe by next year that'll be fine. So yeah, my key role is leading and coordinating the activity around Challenge Poverty Week. So I just want to start by saying thank you to Stirling Council for once again supporting Challenge Poverty Week. I know that events like this one and some of the ones that you've done through the week, even social media, take time and planning and resource and people to get other people into the right places at the right time. So just to say your involvement and the involvement of all local authorities is incredibly important, especially now where it seems that people are kind of constantly in stormy waters. So what is Challenge Poverty Week? Many of you have been involved before. Some of you may be taking part for the first time, like myself. Yeah, I'll give a very brief an introduction to it, even though we're coming to the end of the week. So the first Challenge Poverty Week was launched by the Poverty Alliance in 2013. The aim was to highlight the injustice of poverty in Scotland, and that continues to be the aim. We're wanting to highlight the reality of poverty in Scotland. Far too many people are trapped in the grip of poverty, and we also need to challenge the harmful stereotypes that exist around poverty. It really is unjust that your chances of being on a low income and living in poverty are tied to where you live. The week aims to showcase, though, that there are solutions to poverty. Having policies which boost incomes and reduce the cost of living can be a way out. And to show that collective action based on justice and compassion can create these solutions. We work with others to increase public support for these solutions. And if you follow the hashtags, hashtag Challenge Poverty and hashtag Turn the Tide, you'll see the masses of work that's been done across the country. The week is an opportunity for us to raise our voices against poverty and unite with others in calling for a just and equal Scotland. So as I said, we are coming to the end of Challenge Poverty Week in 2022, which is why my throat's a bit sore. I've done far too much talking. But the week started on Monday, ends on Sunday, but the campaign doesn't stop. And after this week, we can, and I don't think we will, be silent on the actions and solutions that are required. There is a need to ensure that people can access support easily, and I know that that was a big part of Stirling's campaign, signposting to services and resources to help care for people, whether it's their well-being, whether it's their home, or whether it's ensuring they can get access to food and other vital resources, making sure people can access emergency support when they need it. So each year, hundreds of organisations in Scotland take part, and it looks like that's not changed this year. With lots of COVID restrictions last year, we still had around 400 organisations taking part, and I think that sends a really powerful message. Everyone from elected representatives like on this call to charities, local authorities, community groups, activists, faith groups, businesses, schools, colleges, unis, trade unions. So we might be from different sectors, different backgrounds, have varying levels of experience, but we can all come together during Challenge Poverty Week and call for change and call for a just and equal country and showcase the varied and wonderful work that has been done by people and communities across Scotland to turn the tide on poverty. So this year, the day that Challenge Poverty Week started was probably quite significant, and the new energy cap was just introduced. A really worrying and somewhat unpredictable time for many families and communities. People already experience poverty, continuing to feel that there's no escape from it, and those being pushed into it, experiencing new feelings and situations that they've never experienced before. There's lots of people requiring support, guidance, and a helping hand. And really there needs to be structural change and redesign of our economy, but at the same time, there is people, and we've seen that from Challenge Poverty Week, ready to put out their hand in support. There is, of course, the expectation that anti-poverty organisations such as the Poverty Alliance will talk about poverty, but I do think that message becomes a lot more powerful when everyone's involved. And as I said, if you follow those hashtags, you'll see an absolute array of organisations and individuals, community groups and communities taking part. And I'm going to end on a positive note. There is hope. And throughout Challenge Poverty Week, I've seen some of the most tremendous examples of communities providing lifelines to those who need it. Communities across Scotland are full of inspiring people, and even though they're under pressure and feeling the strain, they continue to push for change. Help is available, people care, and we're determined to see change. This is more than an awareness week, it's an action-focused week, urging those in power to act. And I'm really glad that you're all here to raise your voices and amplify those messages, along with so many other people in Scotland. So thank you. And sorry, I'm getting croakier and croakier as I go on.
Thank you for that, Alison. What a baptism of fire for you, joining a new job just ahead of a Challenge Poverty Week. I'm sure you've had a very busy week, but thank you very much for giving your time to us today as well. It's lovely to have you with us. Thank you. So I'm now going to introduce you to our speaker, Professor John McKendrick, who we're delighted to have with us this morning. So John is co-director of the Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit in the Glasgow School for Business and Society at Glasgow Caledonian University. That's quite some business card, isn't it? He's primarily concerned in forming the work of practitioners and campaigners beyond the academy who seek to tackle poverty in Scotland. So you've got an audience of those people today, John, I believe. He was co-editor of Poverty in Scotland 2021 towards a 2030 Without Poverty, and writes a column in the Scottish Anti-Poverty Review, which is Poverty Alliance's quarterly journal. He's published many reports, briefings, papers, and has addressed a wide range of third sector and local government events on issues pertaining to the eradication and amelioration of poverty in Scotland. He sits on a group of national partners offering advice and support to local authorities like us and local health boards in relation to the preparation of the local child poverty action reports, and is also a member of the external member of the Scottish Government's Child Poverty Programme Board, and much of his recent research has explored issues relating to food insecurity and school meals. John, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just to check, can you see the slides okay?
Can indeed.
Great, good stuff. Like Alison said, Gerry was certainly a hard act to follow. Usually you get an introduction to these events which is a bit anodyne. It was nice to get somebody speaking with, proper passion and a bit of direction. And I think I would just summarise my presentation in terms of everything Gerry said, and perhaps just a little bit more. As far as Alison, and I've known Alison for a long, long time. If there was MD capable and able to walk into a job and deliver it really well, it was Alison. We seen each other a little more than 13 hours ago at an event last night, so I know Alison certainly will have earned her weekend with the time that it comes along. Crisis was a word that Gerry had mentioned, and crisis is a theme that I'm going to touch upon. I'll give a little bit of background, where we're at. I want to emphasise words. That's the main thing I want to focus on in the presentation, but also get us to think strategically about what we're doing right now, but also what we're doing as we move ahead. By way of introduction, sorry that's a little bit hazy. I am now pandering to people of a certain age. I'm kind of hoping maybe in the chat somebody will be able to identify which single that comes from, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. I'm really showing my age here, but there's significance, as I say, in terms of the words. This place, maybe not too many of us will know, it's called Montpellier. It gives its name to an economic society. After World War II, Europe needed to rebuild, and Europe needed to rebuild by the governments taking control of building programmes to pick up what was a ravaged continent. But the Montpellier Society felt that was the wrong way. They believed in the power of the free market. And just after World War II, they were very much in the margins. Nobody was listening to them. Their ideas were felt to be out of kilter with what was required at the time. But they kind of held their faith, and come the early 1970s, Europe was in a different crisis with the global war, the global oil prices creating significant problems for European countries and beyond. And all of a sudden, the idea of the strong state, the local government and national government rebuilding Europe and rebuilding countries was suddenly felt to be wanting. And the ideas of the free market came to the fore again. And I think ever since then, what was seen to be left field, out of kilter, radical, a bit cranky, suddenly these became the mainstream arguments. And I think since the 1970s, that's the way in which we think is the right way to organise our resources. Now, I'm not here to advocate for the free market. I'm not here to advocate for an unravelled and uncontrolled, big business to take where we're going. The point I'm making is that ideas have their time, ideas have their moment. The Montpellier Society sat for a few decades in the margins, and then it grabbed its moment. And I think we're at a different moment now. I think we're at a moment in time where we're looking for very different ideas to the unravelled power of the free market, or indeed the total responsibility of the national state to take control of our decisions, take control of our communities. I think we're looking for big ideas. I think the crisis, and it's not crisis singular, it's crises plural that we've had to endure for the last decade or so, are forcing us to think about different ways of doing things. So I think the time is right for these different ideas that Gerry alluded to. As far as what poverty is, I think we can look at poverty in different ways. Most of us will think it's a problem, but how we view that problem is not universal. Some, and I would guess not too many in the room today, given that we've signed on for a Challenge Poverty Week event, but some will view poor people as the problem, that they're making the wrong decisions, that they have enough, but they're just choosing to do the wrong things, or they're somehow bad or flawed people. At the other end of the spectrum, there are those that say, well, actually, it's nothing to do with poor people. It's to do with the way that the hidden hand of the economy works, or perhaps the big decisions that government are taking wrong, that vested interests, if you like, keep people down. So very different views of what the problem with poverty is, which lead to very, very different solutions. I tend to sit somewhere in the middle in a way that I think, and I think it's an optimist view, that we have the means to do things better, and that our anti-poverty interventions have just simply not been of sufficient scale and have not been of sufficient ilk. They're not sufficiently effective to tackle poverty in Scotland. I think we can do the right things with the resources we have, and we can actually make a difference. I don't think we have to throw our hands up in the air and rail against the fact that poor people make bad decisions or that big business is keeping people down. I think it's overly simplistic. I think we need to do better with what we have. And as I say, I see that as the vision of the optimists in terms of what we can do. But where we are, as everybody knows, is not in a brilliant place. Lots of different problems impinge upon our lives at the current time. Far too many of our citizens now relying on food banks. Work has become precarious for many. Part-time contracts because they can't get enough work, or 0 hours contracts where we're really not sure what the working week holds for us. And too many of us still not earning on a living wage. Income poverty therefore becomes a reality for far too many. There's political uncertainties. We're not quite sure really what what Brexit will hold in the medium term. It could be good, it could be bad. We really don't know. We know it's not been particularly good in the short term, but longer term we don't know. And certainly the direction that the UK government has signalled takes us in a direction which might make things a little bit tougher for our very most vulnerable in society. Just say I'm not party political. Everything I say here is just with a view on what the current state of affairs is. I would vote for anybody as long as they're going to generate a progressive country. So we're in an uncertain place and not in a particularly good place. And this is a new dimension that we've had to face in the last year or so, and that's grocery inflation. These are experimental statistics from the Office for National Statistics, UK government, suggesting that over the last 12 months, our grocery cost is something of the order of 13% more than it was the year beforehand. So you can see that it's just steadily risen up, got more and more expensive for our basic necessities, which is something I'm sure that we all acknowledge. But it's important, I think, that we do acknowledge as well, not just that things are getting dearer, but these are exceptional times. This is not business as usual that we're currently facing, or another type of crisis. We're in an exceptionally difficult period, I think the like of which doesn't quite compare to what we've been through in recent years. And it means that many people are struggling, and these are just Scottish figures. Slightly over 1 million people in Scotland estimated to be living in poverty at the current time. Now, the next three figures don't add up to this 1.03 million total, because there's a degree of rounding in there. It's not that I can't count, but to illustrate the point, something of the order of 650,000 working age adults living in poverty, and the majority of them are living in a household where someone is in paid work. Paid work is not delivering for far too many households. Almost 250,000 of children living in poverty. And again, the majority of children living in poverty are living in a household with at least some work amongst the adults in that house. And a significant proportion of our pensioners too. So it's across the age spectrum is poverty, particularly concentrated for children, significant for working age adults, but still far too many pensioners living in poverty at the current time. Now, we know our doorstep, we know what Stirling is. This is not poverty, this is just a map from your Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, where the deeper the red is the more intense the deprivation, and the darker the blue is the least deprived areas are. And we will identify, from our knowledge of our doorstep about where these places are, because it tends to be almost endemic, that the things don't change dramatically through time. And yes, okay, we can spot the rat block on that map and know that the rat block has had to endure poverty for decades, probably ever since it was first built. But we can also see some of the smaller villages outside of Stirling also experience poverty. Your Fallons, your Cowies, your Pleen, for example, on the map here. And while it doesn't show as intense poverty in other parts, we know as we get to the Highland parts of Stirling Council area as well, there are still deprivations that are faced, perhaps a little bit more hidden and less visible, but nevertheless an issue for us that we have to address. But if it was a league table, and this is an estimate from the End Child Poverty Collective, Stirling doesn't look too bad. Sitting at the bottom of this league table is a good thing. This is an estimate of the proportion of our children that are living in poverty at the current time. I had to take, big warnings, it is an estimate. But it seems as if it's more of a problem in other areas. And if you take your doorstep, Clackmannanshire, it seems that poverty is significantly higher in Clackmannanshire compared to Stirling. But while that might seem relatively good for Stirling Council as an area, let's just pause and think. We're saying there that almost 1 in 5 children in Stirling are living in poverty at the current time. It's not a good result. It's something that requires attention, and of course it's something that Stirling Council and its community planning partners are giving attention to. But I said words matter, not just figures that matter, and I do want to just use the example of food to demonstrate a point, thinking about beyond crisis, thinking about where our ambition should be. There are two dimensions to food poverty. There is not having enough food, and there is not having enough equality in the diet that we have. And I think we've got to see these as two separate problems that sometimes actually clash. Food shortage and food inadequacy sometimes are two dimensions of the problems that some families experience. But there's also some situations, I think, where food shortage and food inadequacy pull in different directions. And specifically here, I'm thinking of school meals. So for very good reasons, we have nutritional standards for our school meals, a certain quality that must be provided for our school meals. But I think the reality when we talk to secondary school pupils in particular is that the diet or the fare that is provided in schools is not what they enjoy. It's not what they prefer to eat. So sometimes that drive for food adequacy actually leads to a food shortage. And what we often find is that too many school pupils that are entitled to free school meals do not take a free school meal because the food that is provided is not what they like. And that, to me, is really important, because while we should absolutely strive for quality food for all, I think at the current time, I think we have to think, right, what's our immediate priority? Is it getting calories in somebody's stomach, or is it, like having been quite zealous, if you like, in terms of food quality and making sure they eat the food that we think they should be eating? So food poverty, as I mentioned, is both. It's not enough food of sufficient quality. And much of what we do when it comes to interventions to intervene to support people is about tackling food poverty, either in terms of dealing with the shortage or trying to ensure they eat food of a better quality. That's what food banks are about. If we have pantries or larders or community supermarkets, which are perhaps, some might argue, more dignified approaches to dealing with these food inadequacies and food shortages, then what we're really doing is dealing with food poverty. But a point I would make is that that's not the same as food security. And sometimes that's what we talk about, as if by developing a food bank, we're providing food security, or by introducing a larder, people can help themselves to food, perhaps leave some food at the same time. We are supporting food security. And I think it's really important that we don't think that what we are doing is promoting food security, but we understand that all we are doing is tackling food poverty. Because food security is more than that. It's a bit of instability. It's a bit of confidence that you will be able independently to access enough food of sufficient quality. And the only way that we can give people food security is by ensuring that they have enough pounds and pence in their pocket to make these decisions themselves. Until we eradicate poverty, until we really make significant inroads into poverty, we are not, and I really emphasise, we are not providing food security. So I'm not saying that what we do is wrong, and what we are doing is absolutely fundamentally important, but let's not pretend it's more than it is. All we're able to do is deal with the crisis of the problem. We deal with food poverty. I think we should be aspiring for food security. I think we should be working towards a nation where people have enough money that they can make their own decisions, and they can do so with confidence that they'll have access to enough food that allows them to have a diet that's both enough and is also of sufficient quality. So as I say, these words, in my opinion, matter. And I think that means we've got to start thinking strategically. Now, Scotland thinks strategically. We are now in our second iteration of our child poverty delivery plan, because we as a nation have committed, statutory commitment, to eradicate child poverty by 2030. And again, this non-party political point I'd like to make. It was universally supported in the Scottish Government when this Act came in 2017. All political hues, Conservative, Greens, Nationalists, Labour, Liberals, Democrats, everybody, and Independents, all voted to bring in this commitment to eradicate child poverty in 2030. And it was brought in 1 year after the UK Government reneged or withdrew from a similar commitment for the UK as a whole. And I think that's really important, because we've got a different political context in Scotland where we have a more universal and collective sense of purpose. Now, of course, we have our differences, but I think here in Scotland we've got a clear sense of purpose about what we want to do. And the scale of ambition has been ratcheted up in government, although we might not see it, is beginning to work in different ways, and to both upscale the activity, but also to work in different ways, cross-departmental, to try and achieve these very ambitious targets looking ahead to 2030. But it's not just a national ambition, as you know, it's also a local commitment. And in Stirling, like every other authority in Scotland, in conjunction with this local health board, it must produce then a local child poverty action report. And across the country, we're moving to our fourth iterations of these reports. Your plan. And really, I do believe that it's really important that people buy into this activity, because it won't be achieved by the national government alone. It won't be achieved by Stirling Council or the NHS Forth Valley alone. It requires across the board effort where everybody is doing their bit, understanding the contribution that they can make, and then doing that contribution effectively. These little small contributions collectively are what are going to make the difference, and what are going to significantly reduce that 18% of children in Stirling living in poverty by 2030. These are the types of activities that are envisaged, indeed, which Stirling Council and the local health board and its partners are working towards. Ensuring that people can increase their income from employment. ensuring that people have their income maximised from social security or benefits in kind, and wherever possible looking to reduce the cost of living that people face. And that clearly has become more of an issue at the current time. But even before this cost of living crisis, there were things that we had to do, things that we were beginning to do to make the pounds and pence in people's pockets stretch that little bit further. The cost of the school day, I think, is an excellent example of that, the cost of the school day work, where while our education is free, that we do not charge people to go to primary school or secondary school, there are lots of associated and hidden costs with schooling, and in ways that, you know, are absolutely inadvertent. They're not by design. We were making schools more expensive for pupils than it had to be. And in lots of different ways, schools are beginning to roll back in that. Be it being a little bit more careful when I have the dress down days where people are asked to bring along £1 to have the dress down day to raise money for charity. A fine and aspiration and to have, and a good community benefit. But if you're a family that's really struggling, those couple of quid for maybe 2 or 3 children in a school begin to become a problem. And it's thinking along those lines where our decision making puts poverty centre, and we think about it, how is this going to affect our very most vulnerable citizens? And it goes way beyond schools, of course, to all of our services that we provide. So there's lots of things that we can do locally that might seem small and minuscule, but are part of that broader effort, that collective effort at chipping away at the problems that people experiencing poverty face. I talked about thinking strategically. Well, there's lots of things that means, because reducing poverty for many of us in the room just now isn't about reducing the number of people living in poverty, because we can't do that. You know, if you're a community organisation providing vital support for people, you're limited in terms of what you can do to reduce that person's pounds and pence in their pocket. But perhaps what you can do is make a really important contribution to protecting them from the very worst excesses of poverty, or in enabling them to increase their chances of living a poverty-free life, or indeed helping them avoid slipping back into poverty. So I think we have to strategically think about what we're doing. And the reason that's important, of course, is because these different strategies are reaching out to different populations. This graph then is that, you know, simply splitting up the population into 10% poorest into 10% most affluent. And depending on what our strategic goal is, we're reaching out to different groups within the population. So if we're concerned to protect from the worst excesses of poverty, we tend to be focusing on those that are the very most poor, the destitute amongst us. If we're thinking about reducing the number of people living in poverty, we very often focus on people that are just below poverty to try to get them just over the line, etc., etc. And I think we have to think that through. My own opinion is that all of these goals are worthwhile, that you know, they're aspirations that are important. It's important somebody does it. But I think collectively, as a council area, and even as a community, we have to make sure that we're covering all bases, and that what we're doing is we're touching all these populations that need at the current time, and ensuring that we're not duplicating, but we're getting the right resources to the right people. And this is where I do stand in my soapbox and just throw at you some ideas for the current time. We're going to move beyond this crisis, but when we move beyond this crisis, and here is the grocery inflation data again, this is a projection of where we're going with it, it's going to continue to increase, the economists tell us, and then the rate of inflation is going to dip down, but it's still going to be increasing. We're not going to have food prices falling back to where they were a couple of years ago. They're going to remain high, and they're going to be higher than they are just now. That's what the projections are telling us. So this is not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. So this is my 7-point shout at you plan that I'm quite happy to come back and you tell me if I got it right or wrong. I think the reality is we're in a big crisis just now, and we have to absolutely focus on that crisis this winter. Can't emphasise it enough. That's our immediate priority, is helping people through this crisis, and that's exactly what it is. But we have to move beyond it at some stage. It's not our immediate priority, but we have to move beyond it. And that means we really need to start to understand what our local, I'm using fancy words here, food ecosystems are. You know, what's our framework of access to food in our communities? And to jump down to point 5, I think we do need a micro geographical focus here. You know, are we adequately serving people in Fallon? Are we adequately serving people in Raploch? It's no use having all the services central in Stirling. We have to think about how they live their lives, how they're able to access services. Is there an emergency food process that people can access in Gartmore? You know, the smaller populations out in the rural areas that might nevertheless be finding things tough. I think we've got to look at it at that scale. And that's got to be providing emergency provision, but also I think more dignified forms of cheaper access to food that lie beyond that. It might be a pantry, it might be a community supermarket, it might be a commercial provider that provides food at a lower cost. I think we really have to focus on that going ahead, so that, you know, there's a more sustainable outcome and people are able to access food more cheaply than they are at present. That user-centred focus is understanding how people live their lives and providing the means for them in a way that makes sense to them. I'll give you a concrete example of things that don't work. The very early stages of the pandemic, my own local council, North Lanarkshire, did a lot of really good work, but didn't make the right decisions right away. I live in a little village that's 1.5 miles outside the nearest large town. But they decided that they couldn't access school meals, so they wanted to provide other access to school meals. Initially, they had food packages, and the food packages had to be collected from a primary school in the edge of the town next to the one that I live in. With the best will in the world, nobody was going to be walking that 2 miles in a pandemic to pick up that free packed lunch and bring that back to their house. It was a good idea, but it was a wrong type of solution. It didn't understand how people lived their lives. And that's what we've got to avoid. We've got to understand people's lives and then provide a framework, a food framework in the case of food, that allows them to have dignified solutions on their doorstep. Perhaps more negatively, and I'm happy to, you know, be taken to challenging that, is the last point, food provision forever. I think the reality, well, I'm an optimist by nature. I think we have to be honest and say that, you know, we will still have people in need for a long time to come, and it might actually be forever. Now, I'm not saying we should have food banks forever, but I think we need to find the means to provide emergency food support for a long, long time. You know, people's lives go into transition. They often don't stay in poverty, you know, for 10, 15 years. They dip in for a couple of months, a couple of years, and then back out again. So I think we have to not let food banks go, or not let the alternatives to food bank go. As much as we would like them to, we have to make sure people in the very most vulnerable situations are protected. So just drawing it to conclusion, I'm sure somebody got it. I can't see the chat. The Fun Boy 3 with Bananarama, I can't even see it. The song was, "It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it." I think it's probably both. It's what you do, but it's also how you do it. Because what's really important just now is we not just provide the right things, but we do things in the right way that respects people's dignity, that understands where they're at and what will fit round about their lives if we want to have effective solutions. So thank you to Fun Boy 3 and Bananarama, and I'm very happy to answer any questions if anybody's got anything they want to raise. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for that. I think evidence for me that that was a really compelling talk was I'd completely forgotten the Bananarama thing at the start. By the time you came back to it, I was like, oh, what's this?
Linda got it.
Because
Linda Perkins got it. Sorry, Kay, but just jumping in. Linda Perkins got it. I'm very impressed. Well done, Linda.
Thank you for that. I think what that, you know, I couldn't help but listen to that and without my professional kind of hat on in terms of responsibility for people and community well-being, and that point I think about understanding where people are at when you're designing solutions for them, that just really struck home with me throughout that, and particularly in that example I think about our colleagues in North Lanarkshire. I'm sure we'd have had examples the same here where, you know, in the rush and the urgency to do right and do good for people, that actually we're doing it from kind of possibly an uninformed perspective or something that's not, as you say, looking at that balance of the crisis moment to the longer term need and planning. That was really, really insightful. Thank you. I'm going to open to questions for John. And please remember, there's no daft questions. So any comments, reflections as well on the information and data that was there? Teresa.
Was hoping Leslie would come in first there, and I can't handle a silence, so I've came in, John. That was excellent. I've just came out of a meeting with CLD managers across Scotland, and we're just discussing some of the work that's happened this week, but also we have a kind of winter sessions planned where we're going to be speaking to CLD practitioners about the impact of the cost of living crisis, not only on the people we're working with, but also some of the staff in our teams.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think it's really, really useful to come in and out of these sessions and be involved in this week. I suppose the bit that I've written down here in big capital letters is dignity, dignity, dignity,
Yep.
and how we ensure we do that through all the work that we're going to take forward. We've already been doing loads of work, but when we take it forward, making sure that that's right at the forefront of things. But I just really want to come in and say that was excellent, John. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Theresa. I mean, last night Alison and I were in the annual Challenge Poverty Week lecture. It was delivered by John McKendrick. So social distance between us, poverty safari, he's given the wreath lectures this year. And what you'd expect from Darren is to give a presentation that tells you about the scale of the problems and the solutions that have to be found. But really interesting last night, what he focused on was self-care for the people that are out there making a difference. And also to be reflective in terms of who you are and what kind of contribution you can make. It's very much a community development perspective he was taking. But your point there about acknowledging that some of the people that are out there supporting are also finding it difficult just now, and that we can't be effective unless we're taking care of ourselves. And that's not selfish. It's absolutely, it's a kind of same philosophy, I suppose, when you're on that aeroplane, that you're told to put your face mask on first before you deal with your child. And that's not because you don't like your child as much as you like yourself. That's because you can only be effective if you can function. And we have to make sure that those that are, supporting are also able to function, and that, we look after each other. I suppose the pessimist in me, and I keep saying I'm an optimist, but I keep coming back to pessimist points, is I'm a little bit worried for community learning and development again going ahead, because it looks as if we're going to be in another period of fiscal stress. And I think the signs are that there's going to be squeeze in local budgets, because that's cascading down from the UK with the kind of dividend that comes to Scotland. And what happened in austerity last time was that local government took a ridiculous squeeze, which means it focuses on the statutory commitments because it's got to deliver them, and then the things that are seen able to go are downscaled or lost. And we absolutely know the pivotal point of community development work in communities. And I'm just a little bit worried looking ahead in the longer term that we're going to roll back and have those problems that we had in the last decade are going to come and bite us again. There might not be an issue that's going to cover us over the winter. We might be able to get through that, but I'm just a bit worried in the longer term that we lose sight of the importance of that work. I hope I'm wrong. I very much hope I'm wrong, but I think we need to be making clear the importance of that and why we need to protect it. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, John. Leslie.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, John. I was just reflecting. I think your illustrative use of food for me was really quite chiming, because I just came prior to joining this meeting. I was in the Stirling Food Partnership meeting, and we've just recently had a round of funding for food support. It was challenge funding provided by the local authority, and in a good way, I think what we saw was a mix of applications. We saw, a lot of crisis food, food banks, food pantries, a lot of that. But we also saw, that whole bit about sustainable food, about how do we grow locally, how do we connect those systems. So that's encouraging. But the other thing that we're reflecting on the partnership there is, and again, it was the point that I think you've just discussed with Teresa in particular, was that volunteers, they're at that point of, oh my goodness, because the food volunteers in particular were there through COVID. Yeah. They were all there. They were so active in their community. So that, I think, is something that we absolutely do need to try and support as best we can, because I think the mix is there, but we do need to protect and care for our volunteers. My kind of question, though, and it's kind of built on some of the reflection as well of what you were saying, I was thinking about when you were looking at the stats there. And Stirling being where Stirling is across the piece, but also recognise that in particular communities in Stirling we have very high poverty, particularly in Bannockburn, so not in kind of Raploch, but in Bannockburn's our highest at the moment. And I guess I was thinking about how we make our decisions, and the cost of the school day work is so critical. And I think where we have some good examples is learning about poverty sensitive decision making. The cost of school day work's really good in that. But how do we scale that up? How do we scale poverty-sensitive decision-making, poverty-sensitive budgeting, at a local authority level, at a community planning partnership level? And I know that's really difficult anyway, but I think it's even more challenging in an area like Stirling, where we have such a dichotomy, such a gap between, the rich and the poor. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts as to how we might look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I know some local child poverty action reports, that the way that they're produced and who they involve goes beyond usual suspects. It's not just about your community development or your children's services, but it's also involving your finance, and your chief exec's taking more of a role in saying, right, where is the spend? Where is the balance of that spend? So I think one argument is getting the right people around the table. The right people are always those that are providing the services, but they also have to be the others in the council, because it's a collective responsibility. It's as much a finance issue to make sure that the money is found to deal with these services as a service delivery issue. the other answer to that question, I think, is that also it's cascading the thinking and the mindset out. The mindset that underlies cost of the school day should be the mindset that covers everything we do. You think, right, okay, this is what we want to do. It's good work. Is it going to deliver what we want? You know, are there ways that inadvertently we actually might be making things worse for you know, somebody? And that goes right down to your scouts and your brownies. You know, now you think of the cost of taking part in the scouts and the brownies. It's quite expensive, and therefore for many kids it's way beyond the means of their participation. So I think it's also important in the private sector, the voluntary sector, to be making these decisions as well. Right down to our sports clubs, which is the example I'm trying to give. The back to the food issue, if you don't mind, just a comment on the food. I'm also a trustee of the Scottish Pantries Network, and I think, while it's not the only solution, I think it's a step in the right direction. The thinking then, like, you know, for £2.50 per week, you pick up 10 items, and those 10 items are probably worth 10 to 15 quid. So what it's doing is it's stretching your spend. It's making your spend go that little bit further. But of course, pantries are not a crisis provision, and I think it's really important that we don't. And some have argued, let's get rid of food banks and let's have everything into the pantries. And the point I'm making is there are different groups that are using these services. We need to make sure they're all catered for. And particularly just now, where, you know, everybody's income's getting squeezed, what we can't afford to do is like spread that spend so thinly that we're really letting down those that are the very most vulnerable. It's a tough thing to do to make to meet everybody's needs. But I think we have to look at that in terms of that local food system. You know, making sure the crisis provision is there, but also trying to make sure there's inexpensive food for those that are able to purchase their food at the current time. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks. Linda, I've got you next.
Hi, and thanks, John. Yes, we're both showing our age with those musical references. I think obviously there's an increased awareness and there is a greater coming together now, I think, because with the cost of living crisis, which, you know, some people are saying is more of a cost of existing crisis, you know, that is happening, there's a much more, a greater level of awareness across lots of different organisations and a lot of our partners and people that we're working together, as well as internal council services. I think the big challenge for us is something that you did touch upon. It's about how we reach people who are newly in poverty, who haven't experienced this before, and how we know who those people are, how we find them, how we identify them, how we work with them in a way that gives them the dignity and doesn't, you know, stigmatise them and acknowledges the things you spoke about, that, you know, solutions are different for different people and that there isn't a one size fits all and there's not just an easy way to fix any of this. We know who a lot of our communities are that we work with traditionally, but it's about how we expand that out. And again, you know, I know there's some work being done at the moment about the data that is available to us all at a local level and how we can use that a bit more effectively. But I think a challenge for all of us is how we collectively identify and work with people and families that we've maybe not had to engage with before, and about how we do that in a dignified way.
Yeah, I mean, the collective provisions and that kind of mindset work I'm talking to begins to do that. You know, if you're in a school that's driving down costs, it's driving down costs for everybody. So it's not just the very most vulnerable that are being protected. You're also hitting those in the margins, and that will go in your leisure centres and everything else. So when that mindset rolls out, you are, you know, by coincidence, you're reaching out to that broader population that's there. So part of it is getting everybody to recognise it's their business and begin to do the right things that everybody benefits. Those that benefit most are the very most vulnerable, but those that are in the margins will also benefit from that too. Data intelligence and things such as that, well, there are things we can do. You know, the automatic entitlement to benefits. Glasgow's kind of led the way in this one, where, you know, you're not asking people to apply, you know, X amount of times for all the benefits. You get plenty, you're entitled to it all, and that just makes it more likely that those that are in the margins are likely to get what they're entitled to, because they very likely are going to miss out on benefits that they are entitled to, that we collectively as a society believe that they should be getting in order to live a decent life, but through reasons that are making applications more complex than they need to, or more onerous than they need to, that they miss out. So I think the things that we can do in terms of our systems, there are also things we can do in terms of our provisions and how we conduct our business, which makes it more likely that people will access. And if you've got dignified options out there, then people don't have to worry too much about coming forward, because they're dignified options. I mean, I know I'm rabbiting on about pantries, but the idea of a pantry then, it's like a shop. You know, it's not as if you're going to a food bank, you're going to a shop. There happens to be a cheap shop, there happens to be other options there. So we begin to, you know, tackle these problems almost by stealth. in the way that we do it. It's that back to the Brandorama, it's the way that we do it, you know, as well as what we do.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Linda.
I'm really conscious about language at the moment, and I think that pantry bank example gives me, because I'm really sensitive to the use of the term warm banks at the moment, because as I was to the use of the term food banks originally, that it's ironic to me that we would give them that name, but that I'm also conscious, and it's a bit linked to that point Leslie was making. Language which we should avoid because of the stigma, because we're reinforcing an idea, or because we're normalizing something. And I worry a little bit that cost of living might be doing that, as it's being used as we're all experiencing it, so therefore we're all experiencing it equally. Does that make sense?
It does, but it might flip it, Kate. It might be that that's a way in, because everybody's experiencing it. You're not highlighting the fact that what you're really trying to do is get to the very most vulnerable. I mean, when not been part of the political year, but when New Labour came in with their ideas in the very early stage of New Labour, that they wanted to eradicate child poverty, they didn't want to talk about poverty because they were scared. They were scared that it would undermine their credibility as big business. They tried to do things almost by stealth the way it was brought in. And I think we have to acknowledge that people quite rightly don't like to be labelled as living in poverty. We're even careful when we talk about poverty. You know, Alice and I will never talk about poor people. We'll talk about people experiencing poverty or people with lived experience. You're not emphasising the person, you're emphasising the fact that they're experiencing something. So I think the cost of living might have a little bit of potential. Although I think, as I think Gerry and Linda pointed out, it's as much a cost of existence crisis as a cost of living crisis. But it feels as if it's a little bit more universal. It feels as if you're not highlighting somebody that's in need. Therefore, somebody that's looking for cost of living solutions doesn't feel as if somehow they are lesser or worse or more needy than others. But you know, the words are nevertheless important, and I think how we use those words, how we deliver those words is the most important thing. As for the heat banks, I'm with you. It's a horrible idea. You know, we have to deliver the crisis. We have to make sure that people are able to, you know, live in it or exist in a place that's warm. So I totally get that. But calling them along those lines is just horrendous. You know, we need to think of some other way to package that if that's going to be part of a solution. You know, there's some really well intended but incredibly crass solutions, and it might be that, you know, people use these services because they have to, but you're not making them feel good about themselves for having to go to a heat bank. You know, if you can package it in a different way or take a different strategy that delivers what you're looking for, I think that's much better, because I think we've got to be quite careful, because people use a service doesn't mean to say that service is working as well as it could. It just might mean that people are that desperate that they have no other option. And we've got to think about ensuring that what we deliver, people can access with dignity and they can feel good about themselves. You want people to walk out the door feeling better about themselves, anything that they do. You know, not feeling that, you know, their shoulders are down, I had to receive that. You want them to feel better. And I think just how we package those, whatever we're going to call them, I think we need to be really careful about it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to come to Gerry and then I'll come to Roseanne and Lynn. Gerry, you first.
Right. I'm going to stick with, we're talking about language here, I'm going to stick with emergency, because I think crisis has been overused as well. But I take your point about language having a road in, and you know, the old cliche as well, it's when you're tired of hearing it that some people are just getting the message for the first time in terms of the language. So those of us around the marketplace, if you want, we might be over familiar with it, but it may not have touched other people's lives, I guess. What I really liked about what you were saying today, John, was about the development of a corporate consciousness, basically, or a change in culture, where we realise that as a council or a corporate agency at the service of those whom we serve in various communities, we have an obligation to address that umbrella, right? And if we're singing from the same song sheet, events like this are very useful to bolster and reinforce what our common cause is. What struck home with me with your presentation was in the Scottish Parliament, where every party signed up to the common aim. And then, if you want, primarily, I'm not trying to be divisive here, couldn't follow through because of the ideologies that are really kind of, or priorities with which they want to pursue. So that kind of corporate identity or corporate cultural approach, I think we need to reinforce. And that ultimately is what I saw your presentation today doing. It wasn't so much you offering us something other than a strategy, and a very wholesome strategy, and I think a very powerful strategy. And I think there's much that we could learn and share within ourselves and our own organisation, but take forward and to some degree be evangelical about that. So thanks again for that.
Thanks, Gerry. I mean, in other authorities, you know, Alison is more aware of this than I. Community wealth building is something that's to the core as well. You know, there's other ways in which we can get a sense of local purpose. And the community wealth building's got its strengths. It might not be right for every area. Probably is. Probably should be. But it's that idea about, you know, collectively. You know, and also I think the focus on wealth is good. You know, and enabling. It's, you're almost accentuating the positive and the can do rather than the problem and the cannot. But that collective sense of purpose brings in those with means as well as those who need, and that's I think ultimately we need to do.
Yeah, ultimately we can't see wealth as a bad word.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But let's look at the redistribution of it. Yep. He's done it again, haven't I? I've done it again.
Roseanne.
Thanks. Just John mentioned collective sense of purpose, and then Councillor McGarvey speaking about the change in culture. So I work in housing. We've got about 6,000 tenants. You can imagine the kind of conversations we're having and trying to help folk. But what has struck me is there's an awful lot of people, young mums, single parents, even, you know, families, your usuals. Some of them can't take work because they've not got adequate childcare.
Yep.
And I wonder, as a council, could we be doing more? Could we be having community centres opened up early in the morning? Could we have community volunteers helping? Some of the mums I've spoke to, it's maybe cleaning jobs that start at 6 and 7 in the morning. You're out of school, care doesn't start then. Bairns coming out of nursery, maybe 1 o'clock. They've not got anything for them. And just trying to help some of your communities get into paid employment to help them, because there's a lot of them that want to sit and to be on benefits and things like that. So I just wonder, from a council point of view, if there's something that we could be doing better or initiate working with others. And the question you, John, is have you heard any other initiatives that kind of do that?
Well, I mean, yesterday the Scottish Government released a kind of their new childcare strategy, and the two additions to the 1140 hours that are down there is looking to work towards wraparound care round about the school day, before and after school day as well, and also extending the provisions not just to 3 and 4 year olds but to 1 and 2 year olds, focused initially on more disadvantaged populations. So there is a desire then to improve access to childcare. But there is also trials going on just now, Roseanne, in different parts of Scotland. Again, the government did kind of funded, I think, about 20 projects to try and look at different ways of childcare being provided. And a lot of that had a rural focus, trying to understand the challenges in rural areas in terms of sustainability, very, very different to what's possible in an urban area as well. So I get the optimist comes back in me. This is absolutely an issue we have to address. I mean, even the UK government, in terms of its strategy for recovery, identified childcare as one of the things that it had to do to make a difference in the UK going forward. But we're kind of a bit ahead of the game up here, in that we have it as a clear strategy already. We need to deliver on it now. We need to see that these initiatives that are trialled in rural areas, whether they actually do work and which ones are sustainable and which are not. But it should get better in the years ahead. Because as you say, you know, for many reasons, people can't work because they simply don't, they're not able to work because they don't have the support round about it. We also have to acknowledge, of course, that many people simply cannot work. You know, carers are not always able to take on paid employment. And we know that paid employment doesn't pay enough just now. So while the living wage campaigns and the like and other fair work campaigns are really important, we still have to make sure we've got adequate social protections for those that are unable to work. They can't be forgotten. And again, there's a worry, you know, when we look at the stresses in the public purse, that there might be a squeeze in that at a UK level going ahead. On a misguided understanding that somehow people are, you know, the poor people making bad decisions, which is largely a myth. You know, that yes, we'll be able to Daily Mail will be able to find its example to have its, you know, headline story to bolster its sense of how the country is, but it's largely a myth and it's not a structurally significant problem. But we can't have that driving some of these big decisions in terms of allocations.
Thank you, John. So I'm conscious that there's a lot of people on the call from other agencies, but there's also an awful lot of council staff that I'm really pleased. Roseanne Steve from Housing, I'm pleased to see finance colleagues, education colleagues on the call. So I think this has probably given us all something to think about in terms of how we might come back together and reflect on some of the information that was in John's presentation. John, are we able to get a copy of your slides to share?
Yeah, very happy to share that. No problem at all.
Brilliant. I could do that through Anya. Thank you, Anya. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Chris Kane, Leader of the Council, for some closing remarks. Chris, are you there?
I am here, Kate. Hopefully you can hear and see me okay. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'll make this quick. We're now running late. I'm Chris Kane. I'm the leader of Stirling Council. Before the election of May, I was convener of the committee that Gerry is now convening, so very much involved in this area of work. I've also done this Challenge Poverty Week a couple of times now, so I didn't write remarks because, as I learned the first and the second time, every time I write remarks, I usually listen to the presentations and throw the remarks out the window. John, another song from Bananarama and Fun Boy 3 is really saying something, which is hopefully an appropriate compliment for your presentation today, because it really was thought-provoking and educational and helps further arm us in the fight against poverty. Also, Bananarama's I Want You Back, which is applicable to Challenge Poverty Week events in the future. You know, sometimes I feel that having a goal of eradicating poverty is a bit like Stirling Albion having a goal of winning the Champions League. It's possible, but the size of the challenge often seems insurmountable. Now, if I stick with the analogy for a minute, the thing that would make it possible is money and time, lots of money. But we don't have lots of money. So what we've got to do is invest in the team where we can. We've got to work diligently and we've got to keep moving forward. And I think we've also got to remember to celebrate the victories and the skill on display in the pitch along the way. Because all of you here on this call, at the risk of stretching the analogy to breaking point, are the players. And if we don't have match fit players, if we don't have you resourced, if we don't give you the support, well, your job of winning that Champions League is going to be nigh on impossible. So can I just thank you all, everyone on the call, for the work that you're doing in this. It is a team effort. And without you on the pitch, we've no hope. With you on the pitch, there is hope. Alison said that there's hope, and there is hope. There's just not enough food, there's just not enough money, and there's not enough heat. We've got to do what we can to tackle this. We've got to, you know, really stay the course, focus on what we're trying to do. You know, at the moment, I mean, persistent poverty in Stirling is getting worse. That's there's nothing else you can say rather than that. When you look at the SIMD statistics, you know, we had a presentation last week that was looking at 2016 versus 2020, and it's going up. Thankfully, at the moment, it's not going up massively. It's going up marginally, but it's going in the wrong direction. We need it to be going down the way. And that isn't going to happen at the moment. There are those that have suddenly found themselves worrying about poverty that have never experienced it before. Now, worrying is the start of a path whose ultimate destination is despair. And I think we've got people on various points in that path, people who've been on that path for a long time, but people who are just at the start of their journey. So somewhere between worry and despair is where everyone is that's on this journey. And it's our job, again, to pull them back, pull them out, pull them up, and moving them further up the path back. If we can get those in despair to worry, that in itself is a small victory. So, you know, recognise that what we're trying to do is a journey, and everything we do is a step-by-step process. We can't solve the problem just as we can't win the Champions League, go Beanos in one go. Kate, you mentioned you were alive to the language issues we use. You know, my background is journalism and communications, and one of the things that I'm always conscious when I sit in on this call every year is you are actually communications experts. You're marketeers. You know how to reach people. being able to talk to people, being able to connect with them is an incredible skill that's often underrated. That you can identify those who are in poverty and also connect with them to help pull them out is a remarkable talent, and one that I hope you take a moment to reflect on and celebrate, because there's a hell of a lot of people aren't very good at communication. Politicians tend to ask the wrong question. Sometimes we ask the question, we say, there is a problem, this is how I would help. I think what you do is you say, here is a problem, let me ask you, how can I help you? And then once you've asked how you can help, you start to formulate your path to delivering a service. So that's a communication skill, that's a marketing skill, and marketing can sometimes be used in a food journey to sell you more hamburgers. And there are those in the world that are incredibly good at selling us more hamburgers, but the skills that are used to sell us more hamburgers are the skills that we can use to help people in our jobs. So, marketing and communications is not a dirty word, or marketing isn't. Use the skills that you've got, but recognise there's a skill and develop them. I'd also ask you all, please, to remember that when you're on that journey with those that are experiencing poverty at whatever level they're at, you are on that path with them to take care of yourselves. Remember that it does no one any good whatsoever if you are the player on the pitch that's so exhausted you can't last the 90 minutes. I'm really pushing the analogy now. So, take the support, take care of each other, take advantage of what is an offer to you. Take your holidays, take your days off, switch off. If you don't know how to switch off or you can't switch off, ask for help. Now, as a politician, and I'll try and wrap up a little bit, I recognise that my job as leader of the council is to ask you the question, how can I help you? Now, you're the ones that are asking the questions of those in poverty, how can I help? I'm trying not to get in the way of that. So my question to you is, how can I help? Gerry's question is, how can I help? We are here to support you. So please don't think that we are hovering above you and you're waiting for some sort of decree to come out from the political level that you don't know what to do with. Tell us, get engaged. You've got a pathway within the organisation. You can drop us good ideas as well, but we're here to help. So the question is, how can we help? We've got to recognise we've got next to no money. That's a key thing. The organisation that is Stirling Council and a lot of our community planning partners, we are all struggling. Everybody's struggling. The world is struggling financially. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to put the best team on the pitch that we can, and we're not going to do what we need to do, because this is the job. And like the footballers of Stirling Albion, whether you're in Stirling Albion or whether you're playing at Barcelona, they're all football players, they're all professionals, and they're all doing the same job. Now, I'm sure there are those that support Barcelona that might have an argument with me, but go Beanos, I'll quite happily take that fight on anywhere anyone wants to say it. So for now, thank you all very much for everything that you're doing. Thank you for marking Challenge Poverty Week. Keep up the good work. Support one another, learn from one another, and realise that we're all here for one another. And we'll continue on this journey together, because it's a fight that's worth fighting and we won't stop fighting it. I think I'll stop at that point and say, I think in my analogy, the Albion are still 3-1 up against Barcelona. It's 88 minutes. We'll get there eventually. Kate, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Councillor. You really went with that theme, didn't you? That was
if you plant the seed, it will linger.
You're going to manifest it, Councillor. That's what I feel. You're on a journey to manifest that outcome for your team. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I would just like to thank everyone for attending today. I would like to pay thanks to our speakers, Professor John McKendrick and Alison, who joined us from Poverty Alliance. I'd like to thank both Councillor McGarvey and Councillor Kane for joining us. And I'd like to thank Anya, who's on the call, who has just been absolutely brilliant this week in helping, as she always does throughout the year, her work on poverty and her work supporting that. And the wider team I know on the call who've been involved in events, I'd just like to thank you too. And because you are people who I know by nature of joining this event are people who occupy yourselves probably with some of the most complex and sometimes distressing and traumatic work that we can involve ourselves in public service, I would echo Councillor Kane's point to please take care of yourselves and look after yourselves and your loved ones this weekend, and have a good one when it arrives. Thank you very much.